Hello, I'm Dan Rather, and welcome to the CBS Evening News Online edition. Just ahead, more details emerge in the brutal execution-style killings of the mother and husband of a federal judge. Was it or was it not a hate crime? We'll give you a look. Also exposing the infamous Enron tapes. One man has made it his mission, and wait till you hear what he has uncovered now. Also remembering Vietnam through the eyes of a man who experienced the war in Southeast Asia and the war here at home. It's all starting now on the CBS Evening News Online edition. A double murder in Chicago is prompting new calls for giving federal judges better security. One judge is getting more security after 2 members of her family were shot dead, and the judge herself has received death threats. CBS's Cynthia Bowers reports tonight on new leads in the case, at the scene and on the internet.
Local and federal investigators are working around the clock on the execution-style killings of the federal judge's husband and elderly mother. Both were shot in the head, their bodies found in the family's basement. Among the most promising in a number of leads are a partial handprint, a bloody shoe print, as well as a witness report of 2 men with military-style haircuts seen sitting in a car parked near the Lefkoe home. CBS News has learned authorities are now leaning toward the theory the killings were a hate crime related to Judge Joan Lefkoe's judicial duties.
To me, the hate is against white people. I mean, I hear this talk about hate, but I don't think it's hate standing up for white people today.
A theory which may include white supremacist Matthew Hale, who is in jail for plotting to kill Judge Lefkoe. Just last week, Hale filed a pre-sentencing court motion asking for leniency and claiming the FBI callously caused Judge Lefkoe and her family to think her life was in danger needlessly. That Judge Lefkoe may believe it, Hale added, was a source of deep pain to me. In the chat rooms of white supremacist websites, talk of the murders has ranged from celebration to concern about a crackdown.
What are some of the people saying?
Prepare yourselves, the worst is on its way.
Civil rights watchdog Devin Burkhart took us on a tour.
How big a role do these websites play in the white supremacist movement?
The web provides an amplification of their hatred and bigotry, and that it allows you to refine and expand it exponentially when you have like-minded voices.
Tonight, the judge and her family remain under 24-hour guard. Until authorities know who was behind the killings, they fear the judge could still be a target. Cynthia Bowers, CBS News, Chicago.
Federal energy regulators have just made public more of the notorious Enron tapes, months after CBS News first aired some on this broadcast. There are now at least 1,500 conversations featuring employees manipulating the energy shortage in the West, especially in California, and gloating over price gouging. Tonight, CBS's Vince Gonzalez, who first obtained the Enron tapes, gives you the inside story on how they came to light.
Eric Christensen is an ordinary guy who drives an energy-saving hybrid to his Everett, Washington office. He says he has a rather unexciting job
handling pretty ordinary utility matters
at the Snohomish County Public Utility District. During the West Coast power crisis, electric bills here went up 60%.
The idea that our ratepayers have to suffer so that these Enron executives can buy another house in Aspen or another Learjet is really outrageous.
Then Enron sued to get more money from Snohomish County, trying to enforce expensive long-term contracts signed at the height of the crisis. But this small-town lawyer just said no, and then sued Enron. To prove fraud, he obtained thousands of hours of conversations among Enron traders the company had routinely recorded. The tapes have been seized by the Justice Department.
Federal investigators told you they hadn't listened to the tapes because they just didn't have the resources. How much has it cost you so far to expose this much evidence?
We've spent about $2 million.
For months, about a dozen people were hired to listen to traders scheming.
He steals money from California to the tune of $1 million or $2 a day.
And laughing about forest fires destroying power lines.
Burn, baby, burn.
Kenny Swain is still burning over what he heard.
You found Grandma Millie.
Yeah, I found Grandma Millie.
Grandma Millie is a reference to what is perhaps the most shocking tape found so far.
Yeah, Grandma Millie, man. Yeah, now she wants her f***ing money back for all the power you charged jammed right up her f***ing $250 a megawatt hour.
It was especially galling for Carl Peckman, who ran the listening room. His mother's name is Millie.
And she's a grandma, and she was just absolutely appalled.
2,800 hours here. What kind of insight does this give you into Enron?
There was no concern about customer welfare at all. And this whole idea of moving to deregulation was built on Enron's promises. And those promises were frauds.
Enron seemed to believe in the saying, nice guys finish last. Maybe this time, nice guys will have the last laugh. Vince Gonzalez, CBS News, Everett, Washington.
From our reporter's notebook tonight, 50 years ago this year, President Eisenhower sent the first U.S. advisors into Vietnam. 20 years later, the last U.S. government personnel pulled out. After a costly and controversial war whose legacy lingers in America today.
Give me some cover!
Even a generation later, it is impossible to escape the shadow of Vietnam.
This is the 25th Infantry Division, the newest troops in South Vietnam for the United States. This is part of their first heaviest action.
Fire!
Vietnam was the longest and eventually the most unpopular war Americans have ever fought.
Thunder Road is a microcosm of American frustration in this new kind of war. Almost every convoy that moves down this road takes casualties.
This was a new kind of war.
Oh, we gotta go.
Both in the way it was fought.
How's your morale, Sergeant?
Fine.
And the way it was reported by the press.
The showdown came the next day, and again, Dan Rather was there.
And the Viet Cong has opened fire on the convoy. We're now firing back.
And being there meant seeing the grim reality.
Remember to stop the bleeding!
Vietnam was the so-called living room war. For the first time, combat footage could be seen on television every night.
Stop that airstrike! It's coming a little too close!
One soldier I met at that time was a young Marine lieutenant from New York City, Raymond W. Kelly.
I was with the 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines.
Today, Ray Kelly is police commissioner of New York City. Do you remember when we met there?
It was in the Phu Bai area. I know it was certainly a hostile area. You were the only person that I encountered in the press in my time in Vietnam.
What he did encounter were the heavy casualties that came to define the war.
I remember young Marines being killed, being maimed. I remember piles of body bags after big operations. Those are kind of the most vivid memories that come back to me.
Kelly returned from the conflict in Vietnam to the conflict at home. Growing anger against U.S. involvement sparked widespread protest against the war and the men who fought it. When you came back from Vietnam, did you run into hostility?
Yeah, and I was surprised that I was involved in policing demonstrations against the war.
Soldiers returning home from Vietnam were not being treated as heroes by some people. Rather, they were treated as baby killers.
I felt that the people demonstrating certainly were not fully informed about troops, what the troops are going through, and the difficulties of just fighting the war.
The guns are silent now, but the cost of the Vietnam War is forever remembered. More than 58,000 Americans lost their lives. Thousands of names, etched in stone, tell the toll.
I remember a country that from the air was beautiful, but when you're on the ground it was less than beautiful, and it was dangerous. It's an experience that I'm so glad that I had, but it's not something I would necessarily want to do over.
More stories are just a click away, but be sure to join me on television for the on-air edition of the CBS Evening News. On Thursday's broadcast, the criminal conspiracy we call Watergate. It's difficult to overstate how big a story, how an important story it was, but even today, some questions remain. I'll ask some of those of one of President Nixon's closest aides in a reporter's notebook. For CBSNews.com, I'm Dan Rather.